I thought you started to see flashes of what I would imagine Ben Johnson wants. Because what you saw versus the Lions, as opposed to Week 1 versus the Vikings, that Williams, for the most part, was more decisive from the pocket.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It's a Finish Strong Friday. Greg Cosell's in the house. I got to give you my thoughts on last night's game that I called on Westwood 1 between the Dolphins and the Bills. And there's once again some news to get to as well. And how about this? I even have some winners. I was able to remember to reward those of you that spread the word via social media at Ross Tucker Pod or at Ross Tucker NFL. Those of you that make comments on YouTube after you subscribe, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, or those of you that just take advantage of any of the sponsors you hear on the show. If you do any of those things, by the way, email me, ross@rosstucker.com, so I make sure you are the winner. But for now, it's Greg Cosell time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, a bunch of games to get to today after we got to several yesterday. Let's start, unbelievable, looking like it's going to be another backup quarterback. So off the top of my head, what is that? It's at least 4. Bengals, Vikings, Jets. It's going to be the Raiders against the Commanders. I guess we'll find out for sure today whether or not Jaden Daniels practices, whether or not he'll be able to play. Remember, I think he surprised a lot of us when he played against the Bears last year, when he didn't practice much. So maybe he ends up playing, but maybe not. Just curious, obviously they like Mariota. When he's gotten in there last couple of years, he's played pretty well. Any thoughts on Raiders Commanders, Greg?
Well, I think the obvious point with the Raiders is, and they talked about this after the last game, the loss to the Chargers, was their sort of inability at this point to run the ball with either volume or effectiveness with Ashton-Jeanty. I would think that would be something they'd really focus on. I think Geno Smith over these last number of years has shown for the most part that he's a quality NFL quarterback. But again, we get caught up and we just focus on quarterbacks. And, the more I watch tape, there's so much involved with the team element of offense. And it's really, really hard every week for your quarterback to drop back 40, 45 times because it's not only the quarterback, Ross, it's the offensive line. I mean, this. Offensive line play when you drop back to pass, unless maybe it's a quick 3-step drop timing throw, is really a reactive kind of action. And that's really hard to do 45 times a game. And I think that, they've got to find a way for the run game to be the foundational element of their offense, not dropping back Geno Smith as often as they have through 2 games.
Well, and what's interesting to me about that, Greg, is we know Pete Carroll wants to run the ball. That's always kind of been his MO. And I think a lot of people don't realize, but you and I do, Chip Kelly likes to run the ball.
Correct.
Just because he does it from up-tempo, or just because he does it from, more spread personnel or whatever, that's always been how Oregon really gashed people, or Chip Kelly offenses have gashed people.
No, I agree. Even Ohio State, when he was there last year, had the big-time run game with the 2 backs. So, I think that offense just needs a little bit of a recalibration. And normally, Ross, and we've discussed this, you stabilize your offense by running the ball, not by throwing it.
Let's get to the Broncos and the Chargers. This is a good one. Broncos had a couple things go against them against the Colts. Probably could have, would have, should have won that game. Yep. And the Chargers have looked super impressive to start the year, Greg. I would say maybe especially on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of buzz building for their D coordinator, Jesse Minter.
I'm glad you mentioned the defense because they have a player, and, we go in different directions when we talk, but I really want to focus on a player on their defense that maybe not a lot of people know about. And I thought coming off last season and now through 2 games this year, I think you could make an argument he's one of the best linebackers in the league, and that's Diane Henley. And he's a critical piece. He may be, everybody talks Derwin James, obviously a great player, and now Mac's going to be out for at least 4 games, and he's obviously a really strong player. But Henley, to me, when I watch their tape, I feel like he's sort of the rock that holds it all together. And they use him in multiple ways. He doesn't come off the field. He played over 90% of their snaps a year ago. He's played every snap through 2 games this year. He's just one of those guys, Ross, not well known because, the Chargers being on the West Coast, but he's just a really, really good player.
Well, and he was sick on Monday, so they weren't exactly sure whether or not he was going to be able to play, but clearly they needed him, and he was able to come through for him. He had that interception on the first play of all things for the Chargers. And I got to tell you, Greg, people have differing opinions on him. When I watch Justin Herbert, and he has not played his best in the postseason, and we know that, and hasn't had the success, but I don't know if you've been around him, Greg. First of all, he's huge.
He's huge. I've seen him in person. Yeah.
Secondly, good-looking kid, got great hair. Seriously, he runs well, and when he throws the ball, it almost looks like Carson Palmer or Troy Aikman to me. It looks like the way you're supposed to throw the ball. I mean, he's like out of central casting for a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, and because he hasn't been great in the playoffs, people have this sense that he's not very good, and we'll see how his career plays out. But there's not a coach or coordinator in the league that wouldn't tell you that he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. Everybody knows that.
He is very, very talented, that's for sure. What about the Cowboys and the Bears? The Cowboys have gotten off to a really fast start offensively.
Yeah.
The Bears, not so much. Obviously you talked last week about the progression and what you're looking for from Caleb Williams. Did you see any more of that against Detroit?
I thought you started to see flashes of what I would imagine Ben Johnson wants. Because what you saw versus the Lions as opposed to week 1 versus the Vikings, that Williams, for the most part, was more decisive from the pocket. He was not getting stuck with little sense of clarity. Now, as the game progressed and they were forced to throw it on every single play, which of course is not what you want to do with him, then he kind of reverted at times a little bit to just, not seeing it exactly right and then moving around. But I actually thought his best throw of the game was a ball that was dropped by Dunze. It was a deep dig later in the third quarter. It was a strike. But it comes back to something we spoke about a little bit yesterday in relation to Cam Ward and young quarterbacks. Just the idea that he has to understand what is and isn't pressure by NFL standards. Because quarterbacks that have always moved throughout their life, Ross, that they show a tendency to break down in the pocket prematurely and therefore unnecessarily. And because they've always done that, and they've always done that well. And in any offense, you don't want your quarterback to do that. But Ben Johnson's offense has a lot of intermediate to intermediate vertical type throws, and you can't break down. You've got to sit there, and you've got to let it develop. And, obviously we've seen Jared Goff in the Ben Johnson offense for 2, 3, whatever number of years it's been, and he's a master at it. And that's why Goff is Goff. That's where Caleb Williams has to get to, where he stays there, lets it work, and then lets it rip, because he can let it rip for sure.
It's interesting, too, because on the other side for the Cowboys, I think I thought, in my head, I thought Schottenheimer, run the ball.
No.
But the Cowboys, Dak looks fantastic, and they're chucking the ball all over the place, which is what they should do with their personnel.
Well, a couple of points. Number one, people may not remember that Brian Schottenheimer was the OC in Seattle a number of years ago when Russell Wilson got off to that phenomenal start, the best start of his career through about 8 or 9 games. And then it changed. A lot of people have different views of that Pete Carroll said, hey, we got to run the ball. Who knows? We weren't there. But people forget that Russell Wilson had his best start of his career throwing the ball under Brian Schottenheimer. And the other thing is they move forward with their pass game. I'd like to see them get George Pickens a little more involved. He's really he's a true boundary X, that single receiver to the short side. He can win multiple ways. He's big. He can run. He has ridiculously good hands. To me, obviously, C.D. Lamb and Dak have a connection, but George Pickens is a really, really difficult cover. And I think as the season progresses, they'll get him more involved.
By the way, just about the quarterbacks in the pocket, the thing that's interesting is, both of those guys, and this rubs me the wrong way as a former offensive lineman, but Cam Ward, Caleb Williams, it really is frustrating when guys like step into sacks, right? Or don't get rid of the ball. You know what's crazy, by the way, Greg? We didn't touch on this yesterday, but this is the best I've ever seen Daniel Jones move around the pocket. He's always been bad at that, but he's been moving around better and buying a little bit of time and then delivering the ball.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something I made a note of as I watched that tape. You guys know I take really copious notes when I watch all these games. That's something I immediately noticed. He was not very good at pocket movement, and that's moving within the pocket, not running out. He's always been kind of fast in a straight line. But the style in which he plays, he needs to move within the pocket to avoid pressure. This week, I really noticed it exceptionally well against the Broncos. He did the best job of it that I can recall seeing him do. And if that becomes part of his game, that will really help him continue to play well.
All right, let's talk about a battle of unbeatens in the NFC West. It's the Arizona Cardinals, who are 2-0. They're not exactly lighting up the scoreboard, but they're 2-0. And they're playing the Niners, and felt like that was the best game Mac Jones had played in a while, Greg. Obviously, we'll find out later today and over the weekend if it'll be Mac Jones or Purdy. Purdy's been out there, but I'm curious. Let's just start with Mac Jones and what you saw from him.
Yeah, I thought he played well. That's an offense that really defines things for a quarterback. So the primary read more often than not is where you throw the football. I thought his touchdown pass to Jennings, though, was just a great example of post-snap operation because the look was cover one all the way. And I think if it was cover one, he would have gone to McCaffrey to the boundary on the wheel route because that was the route called, and it would have been Pete Werner covering him, and I think he would have taken that throw. But then when the ball was snapped, Ross, the coverage totally changed. It became cover two, which meant McCaffrey on the wheel was not the throw. And then that's where the post-snap operation and the processing come into play. And he saw it immediately, and he hit Jennings on the inbreaker, and it turned out to be a touchdown. Mac Jones, that's who he is. In some ways, he's similar to Purdy stylistically. So we'll see who goes this week. I would think they'd be comfortable if they had to put Mac Jones out there. But, the Cardinals, everybody focuses on Murray. Their defense is good. Although losing Garrett Williams, I think, is a big deal, but their defense is really good. Jonathan Gannon, Nick Rallis, they do a great job with what they have and the deployment of tactics and personnel.
Any thoughts on them offensively? Greg, the thing that's interesting is they want to be run-based.
Yes.
I'm a little surprised they're not running it better so far this year. Obviously, teams are focusing to try to slow that down, knowing that that's, they had the most explosive runs in the league last year, over 10 yards, and people are they know that's the foundation of what they are.
And it is. And James Conner's an overlooked back who's a very, very good back, and they're trying to get Trey Benson more involved. The thing that is still surprising is just the Marvin Harrison situation. He's sort of a secondary player within the context of their pass game. Clearly, Trey McBride is the number one receiver. Who knows? We're not there. But, Marvin Harrison, you would think that they would like to see him become much more of a primary force in their pass game. But, with Kyler Murray, we've talked about him. It's just hard to get a week-to-week read. You don't feel like the pass game has staples that are going to happen every week, other than the fact that he's going to throw it to McBride.
Yeah, and, I'll say this. Last year, Marvin Harris or Kyler Murray to McBride, Greg, was like 75% completion.
I know.
One of the best in the league. And Kyler to Marvin Harrison was 53%. the dead last in the league, the worst.
I know.
So I think it's interesting. I think Harrison's better. I think the connection's better. But if you're the OC, you're probably going to call the plays for that where it's 75% rather than 53%. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you're probably going to make McBride your number one guy if he's clearly the most efficient target.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit I haven't studied Marvin Harrison in detail through these two games. I saw him last year, and in terms of separation, I think he's got a little bit to work on to be a little bit better at that at the NFL level.
Let's talk, Greg, about Sunday Night Football. It's the Chiefs and the Giants. Neither one of them has won a game yet.
Yeah.
The Giants, Russell Wilson was dropping bombs to Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson. He has always thrown such a beautiful teardrop, deep ball. And the Chiefs, Greg, I can't. I mean, I'm sitting there watching the Chiefs against the Eagles, and it's just remarkable. We talk about depth, and you talk about preseason games. It's the fourth quarter, Greg, and Mahomes is out there throwing the ball to Nico Remigio and Tyquan Thornton. I mean, it's like unbelievable. These guys wouldn't even be on a bunch of other rosters.
Yeah, and that's obviously a concern for them right now, that their wide receiver core is limited. And what they don't have, though, Ross, and it gets back to what we've talked about numerous times, is they do not have a run game to fall back on to stabilize things and generate a sustaining feel to their offense, so they can kind of move the ball. I don't know. I think that's something they need. I don't know why they don't run it better than they do. I don't think their backs aren't special, but you don't need a special back to have a sustaining run game. Much of their offense seemingly becomes Mahomes these first 2 weeks scrambling. I think he's probably had more scrambles in 2 weeks than he's had, in regular season games. Now, in the playoffs, he starts to do that just because it's the nature of the playoffs. But they have had no consistent offense, even their pass game. Now, you can always look at receivers, but again, you need to create with your route concepts and combinations ways for receivers to get the ball. You don't need to have the best receiver in the league. Now, obviously that helps, but their pass game has been very conservative, quick timing, quick rhythm throws. They have not worked the intermediate areas much at all. Mahomes doesn't throw the ball to the intermediate areas, and he really doesn't throw the ball very much outside the numbers unless it's vertical. So, again, I don't know the reasons for that. It's not as if he's not capable of making those throws. We know, of course, he is. But their pass game has a very condensed feel to it right now, and it's not very good.
What about the Giants, Greg?
Well, you'd have to assume against a Steve Spagnuolo defense that the Giant receivers are not just going to be running free over the top 40 yards down the field, which happened far too many times against the Cowboys, which truly surprised me. Those are just mistakes made on the back end, which won't be made by the Chiefs. I'll be interested to see how Spag sees pressure against Russell Wilson. Because, boy, he went crazy with pressure against Jalen Hurts, which made sense because the Eagles' pass game's not very good right now either. But that they're a defensive team right now, the Chiefs. That's the bottom line. And I think that's the way they're going to think about playing the Giants, is being very aggressive with their defense.
Let's get to Monday Night Football. I think it's, along with the Rams against the Eagles.
Oh, yeah, it's a big game.
I think it's the best game of the weekend. And interestingly, two units kind of got back on track on Sunday. The Lions offense and the Ravens defense.
Yeah.
And so now they match up. There was a lot of concern, clearly, in Detroit about, no more Ben Johnson. Well, then they put a 50-burger up against the Bears defense, and it looked more like what we're used to seeing from that Lions offense in recent years.
Yeah, I guess reports of Jared Goff's demise were a little overblown. But this is a tough matchup because, they played Baltimore a couple of years ago in Baltimore, and Baltimore's defense just ate them up. And, Goff's a high-level player for what he is. He's a pocket quarterback. When he's protected, he sees it really well. He can throw the ball at the intermediate levels between the numbers as well as any quarterback in the league. But obviously, if you can get consistent pressure on him, that changes things. And that's what happened 2 years ago. So the question is, can the Ravens exert consistent pressure on Jared Goff? Now, the Ravens do have a good back end. I think Humphrey got hurt. I don't know what his status is for this week, Marlon Humphrey. But, they're a good defense. They play a lot of young players. So we'll see. But that side of the ball is going to be really, really interesting because if Goff has time to throw, then he can beat any defense.
Well, and what's interesting to me about the Ravens defense is, first of all, Van Noy is out.
Yep.
And he might be their most consistent edge rusher. Other than that, they think Mike Green might help them there.
He's played a lot of snaps through 2 weeks, Mike Green.
Yeah, Oweh, had a nice rush the other day against a backup quarterback for the Browns, but he's never really, been the. I mean, I think he had double-digit sacks last year, but he's not a guy that wins consistently. They kind of, and Matabike can rush, but that to me is the game. Can they get pressure
right
with just the front four, or do they have to bring Roquan Smith? Do they have to bring Kyle Hamilton? Because if they have to do that, then you'd think that gives Goff a chance to kind of see it coming and get rid of it.
And they've been playing the rookie Teddy Buchanan, a linebacker next to Smith. He beat out Trenton Simpson. He's a fourth-round pick. I forget where he went to college because I did him coming out. But he's their starting linebacker with Roquan Smith beating out Simpson. So he's played well for them. They play a lot of young players. So I agree. And, of course, offensively, they're a tough offense to play against because of Lamar. I mean, Lamar's been really good from the pocket. He's such an instinctive player with what he sees. That's the way he plays. He just sees it. And obviously, you always got to deal with the run element. And the Lions' defense is a little different this year. So, we'll see. We'll see how that matchup, plays out.
What's interesting, too, Greg, you'll appreciate this. I asked Todd Monken, the OC for the Ravens, about calling plays without Ricard and without Isaiah Likely. And they have this kid they moved up from the practice squad, Zaire Mitchell-Payton. He's been playing fullback. He's not Ricard, but he can play the position. But Monken, and you'll appreciate this, said it makes a difference not having Likely. Every coach loves having two athletic pass-catching tight ends on the field at the same time out of 12 personnel. They haven't had that with Likely. I saw him working out on the side field on Friday, so I wonder if he's available for Monday night. That'd be big for them.
Yeah, no, and that changes their offense big time. The first thing it does is you have to decide as a defense, are you playing them as if they have two tight ends, or are you playing them as if they're pass receivers and you're going to go nickel? And then that changes a lot of things in your defense.
You want to make sure you check him out on social media at Greg Cosell. He's the man. That's also how you know everything going on with the NFL Matchup Show and everywhere you can find Greg and his terrific insight and analysis, including twice a week here on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Greg, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too, Ross.
All right, let's dive into the news. But first, October will be here before you know it. That's when your boy, that's me, is getting a new shower, which I desperately need. I don't know how they do it at West Shore Home. They can actually make the shower area bigger, which I need. That we did not do that right when we first bought this house. Anyway, right now you can get 25% off all projects. So that's your bathroom, windows, doors, full house flooring, which they need. That's probably my next project, by the way. 12 months, no payment, no interest. That is nice. Making it even easier to get started. They're going to give you an extra $500 off on top of the 25% just by scheduling now at westshorehome.com/Ross. So make sure you go to that website for details, westshorehome.com/Ross. You can see all of the before and after pictures from the projects I've done at my house. Man, I can't emphasize enough how awesome it is to be able to get tickets that you know are the guaranteed lowest price, and all the pricing, all the fees are included. That's what my friends at the Game Time app have done, which is why I'm such a huge, huge fan. I mean, they have tickets for as low as $100. Check out the closest NFL game to you or college football game. I think you'd be surprised at how inexpensive they can be, especially when you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Ross to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm guaranteeing that the winner this week is someone that uses the Game Time app. So create an account, redeem code ROSS for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. After you make your purchase, forward it to me, ross@rosstucker.com.
Tuck's Takes.
Thursday night football was a lot more competitive than I was expecting it to be. Credit to the Miami Dolphins for the way they played. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for the Zach Sealer penalty running into the punter that led to the Bills' go-ahead touchdown, and then Tua going ahead and having the interception, the Dolphins might have pulled off the biggest upset by far of the season so far. They were the biggest underdog in any game so far. They went toe-to-toe with the Buffalo Bills, but as is often the case, they made the critical errors late that you just can't make if you want to beat a team like the Buffalo Bills. It wasn't pretty, but the Bills took care of business in, as you can hear, an absolutely raucous Highmark Stadium. Fun night for me calling the game for sure, as the Bills get to 3-0 and the Dolphins fall to 0-3. All right, the news, Jack, that I wanted to get to is the Bucs lost Cody Mauch for the season. I think I forgot to say that on yesterday's Ross Tucker football podcast. We did talk about it on the second Even Money Betting podcast episode this week, but the Bucs lose their right guard. They got all kinds of O-line injuries going on, and the Commanders are officially moving back into D.C. as RFK Stadium that passed, which is very cool. And I promised winners, I got winners. Kevin Burke, he did a terrific job on spreading the word via Instagram. Mike Oliveri used the Game Time app using the code Ross to get tickets to the Pirates game, which I really liked. And then Brett Kindell, I saw your YouTube comment, Brett, loving myself and Greg Cosell. That is awesome as well. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. I would not steer you guys wrong when it comes to gifts for loved ones. myfrontpagestory.com, backofficescheduler.com, human@nyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.